Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is called Discerning What is True. I'm being live today on YouTube, also on Facebook. We'll be sharing a particular book that I've been reading up already, the first 8 or 9 chapters, uh, what we call The Shadow of the Third Century. We'll be reading chapter 10. The author's name is Alvin Boyd Kuhn, who has written many, many books. Um, just look in it, look at his name, and look on Amazon and search those in search engines and see what you find. There's probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 books. Probably not quite that many, maybe less than that, maybe 10 or 15. But he also wrote a lot of other stuff everywhere. If you can get your hands onto it. So this is just what I'm suggesting. You might also want to go to Scrib, or how you pronounce it, because there will be probably information there, and you can download that for free. But this is a book that was suggested to me by Bill Langdon and other books that he suggested, and this is one of the books I'm reading. And I really like this guy. I really like him a lot. He's a good guy. He's got a head on his shoulders. Um, and even back then, that was a you know misnomer, so to speak. Very few people. So the name of the title is simply called "To Faith and Knowledge." So let me turn this recording on so we can make sure it's being recorded here also in the future. Uh, the subdivision of the theme that falls next in place is the obvious perception that the line of cleavage that marks the boundary between religion and philosophy likewise becomes the frontier between faith and knowledge. A synonym universally employed where a substitute word for religion has to be used in just this word called faith. A cognate term for religion is faith. As set forth in our theses, religion presents faith as its main constituent, and it is for the most part simply an attitude of faith. Let's see, let me scroll down just a little bit. So, a want of knowledge being humbly, if not often aggressively confessed. It is that source of trust to which the individual soul must look for assurance and peace when the certitude of knowledge is wanting. Faith is close to being the literal description of what religion generally is, that is, faith and belief. On the other hand, philosophy so deeply rationalizes, as Shelton says, the facts which life presents, and so well catches the marvelous correspondence between the order and harmony of straight thinking and the order and harmony of things, that it lays the solid foundation for the mind's certainty of knowledge, which is the only enduring ground for peace and blessing in the mortal life. The vast abyss of differences in authority and vitality between the two, that is, faith and knowledge, or religion and philosophy, is to be discerned when it is reflected that in the case of faith, the reliance is placed upon the beneficiaries of powers outside the self, while in the case of knowledge, it is localized entirely within. And so he's showing a differential here of what religion is, which is actually depending on something outside of yourself. While with the knowledge is actually is within yourself. You see, that's a big deal, folks. So what he's saying simply is that the truth is already within you. Okay, it's not out there. It's not somewhere over there, not over here, that type of thing. It is within you, and you've got to find it. And he's saying simply, basically, knowledge is the key here. So let's continue on. The disparity is so immense that there never should have been a question as to which is the most desirable element. Of course, you bet. The reign of faith is amended with all the mental hazards that spring back from lack of certitude. doubt, vacillation, dread, worry, and fear, not to mention constant dependence upon the unknown and unpredictable whim of the trusted deity. There is no relaxing a tension of expectancy, either of good or evil event. Hope is the final basic reliance. One is aware that Christian writers, so often transgressing the rules of dictionary exactitude, stretches the meaning of faith until they make it embrace almost really, what is really full knowledge itself. It is made, in other words, they're trying to cover up how weak faith is. That's what they're doing. They're trying to succumb because they know deep down that knowledge is important, and they realize that faith is very not only childlike but also uh, you no longer have the steering wheel, so to speak. You see, so it's made to consist virtually of such a force of inward conviction through mystical pervasions that is a form of knowledge itself. But this ingenuous, that is, a evasion and a breach of intellectual honesty. If faith is knowledge, then it should be called knowledge. Correct. The whole matter is brought to a sharp focus by St. Paul, who obviously does not telescope faith into knowledge, for he writes, "To your faith add knowledge." End quote. Clearly, the apostle is here saying faith, brethren, is good as far as it goes, but it is not enough. It will hold you forever in the kindergarten class. If you would grow in grace and in the favor of God, you must increase your knowledge. Why is people poo-poo knowledge these days? I mean, it's everywhere. It's the in vogue perspective. I'm not interested in knowledge. I'm not interested in thinking because those things are hard to do. So no one really is willing to train their mind or train themselves to actually to read and dig into some things. They just want to cop out of life, so to speak. So let's continue on. It would hold you forever in kindergarten. Okay, I said if you would grow in grace and in the favor of God, you must increase your knowledge. Faith alone will never develop your divinity desired prerequisites of conscious cooperation with the will of deity. It will help you as a child, but when you become a man, you must put away childish things and learn to stand in the consciousness of your participation in the intelligent mastership of your own evolution. And the scripture says that. He says that, you know, stop drinking milk, start taking in eating meat. That's what it means to grow up. You see, this opens the way for the presentation of an item in the current preaching of Christian clergy that should long ago have seen in better light. Every year records the delivery of thousands of sermons on the need in the world of more faith in God. The cry in that irreligion is rampant, engendered by want of trust in providence. Men are wild and reckless in their own base conceits and lawless grasping because they do not recognize the influence of God in the world. Faith is the power that would anchor man more safely to divine beneficiaries. The upshot of this, and I want to say one other thing real quick before I forget. And I think I said a little bit about it last night maybe. People really actually think that God's blessing them when they're with financial money. They believe that that's what God does. In fact, that's what they mean when they ask God to bless them. Is a couple things. I ask you to bless me with good job, good money, and also my health. That's the two bottom lines for them. So it's not it's an attitude, and I saw that in my own self. So I'm not saying I'm any better at that point. I'm just sharing what I'm learning here. But the idea simply is what's happened simply is people just want to sit on their rear ends. They don't want to do any work. you see. They want God to bless them in all aspects of their lives. And that's not what it's about. The upshot of this unremitting emphasis is that for centuries the Christian mind has been conditioned to the idea that faith is the very pinnacle of spiritual virtue. In other words, it's lifted up. It's considered, as long as you have faith. Yeah, I have faith. I'm praying such and such. Yeah, been praying about this issue for a long time in my life. It is considered to be the peak of Christian attainment, the summit product of the Christian life. This is a egregious and hurtful misconception, since it throws the scheme of values quite out of proper focus. It places emphasis on the wrong end of the scale of values. It regards as a consummate achievement a feeling that, on the contrary, an elementary reaction of childlike naivety. It places at the top of the ladder the wrong that actually is the very first and almost automatically step at the bottom. In fact, faith in God is almost as inevitable and automatic as breathing. It is a unfailing as an instinct. It is present a priority and is not the product of cultivation. What can the human being do but trust in the goodness of life? Yes, yes. Any other posture of mind towards life would be anonymous. If life is going to be hostile to man, then trust will avail nothing. Man must assume that life will be benign to him. There is nothing he can do but trust it. Therefore, faith, instead of being the climax of growth in man's closeness to God, is the very first and most naive of the virtues. It is almost pre-virtuous, a spontaneous inevitability. It is the first, not the last, in the gamut of virtues. Virtues begins with it and then proceeds to advance from it to higher aspects of development. St. Paul clearly discerns this status because he begins his ordered series of Christian qualities, taking obviously in the scale of the rank with faith. To your faith add virtue, and to virtue knowledge. So actually, when you look at this here, if Christians are supposed to be doing this thing, they're um, yes, faith. Then you add virtue, and then and to virtue knowledge. So these are stepping stones that actually Paul is speaking of. You see, faith is not the crowning glory of spiritual growth. No, it's not. But his first childlike beginning, yes. This is vastly needed correction of uncritical religionism. So what's happened here simply is that um, Christianity has just continued to mess around and be in the kindergarten level. They have not grown up. You see, they haven't chose to. They continue to drink the mommy's milk. They continue to not pursue deeper things in life. They're not aware that they're supposed to use their noggin, to use their head. When the Christian church, in its violent revolt against the intellectual side of religion, repudiated the importance of knowledge in its system, it was by sheer necessity forced to fall back on faith. Well, there's nothing else to fall back onto, you see. Faith, with its sister called hope, enters when knowledge leaves. You see, there's a vacuum. The mind must, of course, start its quest with the confidence that infinite treasures are there to be gained, but the confidence will be replaced or swallowed up as the treasures are on earth. Gibbons points out to one danger that can all too readily flow from the perpetual exercise of faith when not supported by data or critical thinking and knowledge. It lays the person open, he says, to excessive and perilous expectations or expectancies, generating gullibility. Yeah, yeah, it does. Quote, the primitive Christians perpetually trod on mystic ground, and their minds were exercised by the habits of believing the most extraordinary events. They felt or they fancied that on every side they were incessantly confronted by the visions, instructed by prophecy, and surprisingly delivered from danger, sickness, and from death itself by the suffocation of the church. The real or imaginary prodigies of which they so frequently conceive themselves to be the objects, the instruments, or the spectators, very happily dispose them to adopt with the same same ease, I should say, same ease, the authentic wonders of the evangelical history. It is this deep impression of supernatural truths which has been so much celebrated under the name of faith, a state of mind described as the surest pledge of the divine favor and its future felicity, and recommended as the first or perhaps the only merit of a Christian. End quote. This places behind the analysis made here the support of Gibbon's forceful logic and historical vision at the same time that it has also cites from history itself the actual evil consequences of the substitution of faith for understanding. But he concludes with a corollary observation that again confirms our delineation of the Christian habit of belittling everything pagan. The better to exalt everything Christian, he adds. Quote, according to the more rigid doctors, the moral virtues, which may be equally practiced by infidels, are destitute of any value or efficiency in the work of our justification. End quote. The better sanctity in Christian minds should years ago have seriously set itself to the task of analyzing the sort of dialectic aberrations that could have driven pious people to the invidious position of deriving even their own best virtues when practiced outside their own fold. Again and again, one finds Christians denouncing as vices the identity traits or qualities which in their own practice were extolled as supreme religious virtues. We are almost asked to think that virtue practiced by Christians is virtue, but practiced by pagans, it is vice. Interesting perspective. When religion is reduced from an interest engaging the whole man, his spiritual, intellectual, moral, and physical qualities, and exercised only in the narrow area of faith, as so nearly describes the situation in early Christianity, it becomes the parent of many forms and expressions of untoward and, untoward and harmful reaction. Faith may be never so valiant and perpetually recharged by pietism, but it will not serve to instruct, to enlighten, to guide, and to save from irrational venture. It leaves the devotee bereft of arms and armor which he must have to travel securely and avert evil traps. It still has always spells the lack of intelligence. It needs no logic to certify the fact that faith can never support knowledge or supply its want. It forever leaves the ignorant person open and subject to the errors that knowledge would enable him to avert. The church has held its millions in the cradle stage by decrying knowledge and asking them to rely on faith. Now, why did they do that? I think there's one reason. I'll just say this real quick. I do believe that are the pastors threatened by this? Yeah, in some ways, yes. I think it has a little bit to do with that. If someone begins to figure out some of these things and begins to understand that basically they've been lied to all their lives, they don't want that. They will see you as a heretic in that regard. They will see you as simply an error, you see, even though you're taking the responsibility to grow up. The other thing simply is that I think the pastors also themselves have grown up in that same predicament. And so that's all they know. You know, they'll go to seminary, such and such, and they'll learn about what we call studying scriptures, but they never learn anything about anything else, so to speak. They don't actually. The funny thing is simply is just to say one other thing. Those who are born Presbyterians or Methodists or whatever Baptists tend to go to a Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian seminary. They don't venture into another area where they're no longer. So they would not go to a Lutheran seminary if they are Baptist. Almost 99% would not go. Okay. They would not go in what I would call classes to deal with comparative religion, which would probably be only offered into what I would call more modern or liberal type of seminaries. So that wouldn't work, you see. And they would see simply as, because I've gone to seminary and I've watched these guys who are going to be pastors, and they take very little church history. They take two classes, maybe three. That's all. So they don't understand anything from the past, so to speak, even though a lot of it's also been dribbled and not told the truth completely, you see. So this is how people get, and it's a good job. It's a good job as long as you have people skills and you're able to speak out in front of people and you manage people. That's what you do as a pastor, you see. And if you're elegant, if you learn a pretty, decent words and you can talk more elegant and deeper, and you can, give adjectives to these certain words, then you're even put up on a little bit more of a pedestal, so to speak. And actually, with life, I'm sorry, in actual world life, a religion based on faith is pretty nearly always confined to people of lower and medium rank. The intelligentsia, for the most part, having risen above it, you see, end quote. An immense proportion of those who in childhood go through the customary mill of indoctrinations in Orthodox groups leave that early faith as soon as they attain the power to think freely and study historical culture. Nearly all students cast off the pure reverence for the churchy authority, thinking based on a wide range of data, which is only attained by study, is the accomplishment of the intelligentsia only. It is a dialectic necessary. Then that religion should be the cherished instead of the masses, since it is accepted or reverent authority and held on faith. A vivid picture of what the Christian religion became in the sight of men with minds equipped and balanced by philosophies presented in the Hodges delineation of Celsius' antipathy to the Christianity of his day. In his book called The Early Church, page 68, he recounts Celsius discuss over the personal, I'm sorry, discuss over the personnel of the church on account of their impertinence, which was in exact proportion to their ignorance. He was he was disgusted with their insistence upon confession of sin and the pride which they seemed to take in having no health in them. They spoke like worms in the mud. As a philosopher intent on the pursuit of truth, he resented the doctrine of faith which was offered, he thought, as an easy way to attain that which the student gains with labor and difficulty. It puts the ignorant on an equality with the educated. It leads only to illusion. End quote. Another quote here. Do not examine, only believe. Right. This, he said, was the Christian principle to be abhorred of all philosophers. General Massey sums up a long series of citations from the eminent literary figures of the Roman world who expressed their contempt of Christianity. He says, quote, the primitive Christians were men whose order was fierce in proportion to their ignorance, end quote. The indifference, the antipathy, antipathy and harsh judgment of the learned of the day towards the early faith had puzzled Christian publicists not a little. Hodges gives expression to this perplexity when, in speaking to Marcus Aurelius, he says, quote, but the blindness of the emperor was shared by all the eminent men of the day. The most important movement of the history of man, which was speedily to take possession of the Roman Empire and to build a new Rome upon the Bosphorus, and thereafter to dominate the progress of civilization and to save out of the wreck of barbarian overthrow the books of the very men who were writing in that moment in utter ignorance of the meaning of this struggle and depressed religion. This movement began and continued with no attention from the wise and the great. They either overlooked it or regarded the Christians as the insignificant oriented sect. End quote. In the 2nd century, they were made the subjects of satire by Lucian. This passage of Hodges assumes that in this case the ignorant were wise and the wise were ignorant or blind. The dull and stupid saw with eagle eye what the learned missed. On the whole, there is plenty of cause for disturbance and alarm in such a statement as Hodges here makes. It is an ominous event if brainless people in the year 33 AD or at any time could decry the cosmic and epical significance of religious ferment among the ignorant classes, while the truly wise and great missed it entirely. There is something wrong in the way Hodges draws the picture. Something that Hodges, wise and learned as he is, miss seeing. It is important that he and we alike see what is wrong there. He errs first in saying that the movement reached no attention from the wise and the great. It had plenty of their attention, as witnesses what they said of it and the emperor persecutions of it. Again, it had their attention because they at least took notice of it sufficiently to read its low character and to pronounce severe judgment against it. Quote, a monstrous superstition, exclaims Pliny, Pliny. A pestilence, cries Suetonius. Destructive superstition, says Tatius. Quote, certain most impious errors are committed by them, says Cellius. Quote, due to their extreme ignorance in which they have wandered away from the meaning of the divine enigmas. Origen, which is here in his book called Celsum, Celsum, chapter 6, which statement comments Macy. Quote, it is true as it is intemperate, end quote. Porphyrius adds his contemptuous opinion and wrote his critique of the movement, a work that surely would have been immeasurably valuable had it not been destroyed by the fell ferocity of hatred of philosophy and its literature. If Hodges fails to understand why Marcus Aurelius, one of the world's truly eminent philosophers, should have paid little attention to Christianity except to persecute it and otherwise to disregard it as beneath his notice, he must find it difficult to see why a great and profound thinker should despise a crude and fantastic religion ferment among a small group of enthusiasts upon whom the most inevitable look down with piety and compassion. Yeah, let me explain things right here. Let's just talk about this a little bit because this is important. When I was studying church history, early church history, and all that, there was immense persecution of Christians. There was there in a lot of ways by the Romans. You see, because they did not respect these people at all, and many were killed. We think they're killed. We don't know for sure, but many of them were contemptuous of what the Christians were. And so I was given this taught history, so to speak, about them. And you feel for that. You say, well, wait a minute, these are the people of God. And I was, this is over 20 years ago, not knowing. But in reality, simply is these people were lying to innocent people, and those innocent people were buying into this because it was what I would call cheap grace in some ways, or a cheap way of looking at anything. That everything's been provided for you, you just go along. You don't teach yourself. You don't teach yourself. Da 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 da. This is part of the other thing when you think about all denominations, as far as I know. The main ones basically began to do what I call build study guides. They would go through certain books of the Bible, and they would have these little booklets that go along with it, and you would do that type of thing each week for your Sunday school class, supposedly. But this is how they try to, justify everything. In other words, to help even the teachers that were actually teaching these Sunday school classes. Do you follow what I'm saying? Let's see. So, in other words, to keep them somewhat in trance in some ways, or actually in some ways also not to be able to discern what they're reading. You see. The other thing simply is company likes, I mean, most people cannot stand alone. They can't stand up on their own. Most people are they are dependent upon someone, or not even someone, maybe I should say, the majority. And that's true of everything. That's just true of human nature. And especially if you don't come from a good family background, that makes it even worse, because that's what happens. Your family could be simply is totally dependent and not independent in a way to think on its own. You see. Let's go back to what we're reading here. His persecution of them was no doubt motivated by his sense of duty towards the state, which was being menaced by the Christian agitation and departure from certain loyalties to the nation. So he saw this, Marcus Aurelius saw this a threat to to the power of Rome. It may help us to see what Hodges fails to see if we look at what he himself says some pages further on, page 154. And when we hear him say this, we have to wonder how he can call Christianity, quote, the most important movement in the history of man, end quote, seeing by and large that its effect upon the Occident as a whole different little from its effect upon the world of a Roman Empire, which he describes as follows, quote, there is plenty of other evidences, however, that the internal conversion of the Roman Empire to the Christian religion had effected no visible improvements in the common morals. The world was worse rather than better. Out of it, besetting temptations, men fled to save their souls. This is what Pelagius said also. I don't know if you know who Pelagius was, but Pelagius was a Christian monk that came from England. And he came back to Rome and he became an adversary against Augustine. And he's basically saying, well, these people claim they're Christians, but they're living just like the rest of the world. There's no difference in them. And they'll claim that they're under God's grace. In other words, God doesn't see them sin or doesn't, looks away. So I don't know if you understand what Pelagius is saying, but Pelagius is very straight, says simply, you have free will. You're not born in sin, you see. You choose that, he says. Quote, they fled from the world, which in the first century was believed by the Christians to be doomed and liable to be destroyed by a divine fire before the end of the year. They fled also from the church, which they accused of secularity and hypocrisy. Many of the monks were laymen who, in deep disgust, had forsaken the services and sacraments. They said their own prayers and sought God in their own way, asking no aid from the priests. They were men who had resolved never to go to church again, end quote. And Hodges wonders why men of profound intellectual attainment and spiritual culture paid little attention to this movement along the rabble crowd. Yeah, fanatically and already repulsive in this corruption and hypocrisy. In fact, what it was in the times of during Luther's time, we know it got so corrupt that you could pay a priest's indulgence to get someone out of hell. I'm serious. The priests didn't know anything. They were just about as lost as the people were. They would just say a few little things in Latin and do certain things, and that was it, you see. And then there were the buying of the office. Are you aware of that? That the churches, that was what they call a metropolitan, which was a huge church. Ordinary people who had the money to buy that office. That's what Luther complained about. He said they could buy the office of these large churches and they would become the clergy. And they would also reap the rewards of people in those large churches with their offerings. Not saying Luther's a perfect guy neither, just saying that this is what he said. Because he basically said they were going to buy indulgence. They were basically people would sin and simply, here's some money here, and it would make my sin go away. That's how bad it got. That's how bad it got. Okay. And it does today. It's done a little bit differently, but it's a different way in some ways. It's hidden a little bit differently now. It's more modern, so to speak, but it still goes on, you see. But more of it's like basically politics. But anyway, getting off the subject here. The attention they did give, it was inevitably to hold it up to religion, to derision, and reprobation mingle with piety condensation. But as its theories spread, they were in time brought to the resolve to put out by severe measures of a pestilence, humanity, of ignorance and frenzy that threatened the stable government of the world. Hodges heralds as the greatest event in history the smothering of true ancient light under the blanket of low superstition which brought no improvement, but, on the contrary, rendered life so evil that even from the portals of his own temples earnest men fled in disgust. Luther was to experience the same disgust and loathing of an evil thing as he descended the steps of a Christian temple at a later period. Perhaps the rise and spread of the religion was the most important event in world history. With the rise of critical thought, the advantages of a larger perspective, and the privilege of untrampled judgment, studious minds are calling into question whether the advent of Christianity was the most important event in history in the sense of an advance of the human spirit towards the light. Certainly, any event which, along with much in, in, incidentally incidental good, has brought into manifestation a long train of evils such as bigotry, slaughter, persecutions, wars, divisions, breeding hatred, mental confusion, and delusion beyond measure, and a host of ills never yet charted, must be considered important. But no one can longer claim that it is a glorious important. Millions of intelligent people in the Oriental lands believe it was the most horrendous calamity in all of history. On its evil side, the wish might be that it were less important. Hodges remarks that Ambrose, that is the bishop of Milan in the 4th century, read Origen and Plato, the two Gregories, Basil, and others of the most intelligent leaders at that period had discernment enough to see what wells of truth the ancient heritage of knowledge contained, and knew what Origen was aiming to keep alive in Christianity. But it was becoming more hazardous to read and quote these pagan sources of theology, and Jerome was severely taken to task for nibbling at the same table. So let me explain who these guys are. Ambrose is the one who basically, supposedly, we are told, brought Augustine to the Christian faith. Augustine is a Manichaean. And Manichaeism was quite popular in the eastern part of what we call the Arabic countries, such as Iran, Iraq, the Persian countries, such and such, that is. So he was a bishop of Milan, which was a pretty big, pretty powerful position. But he says he read Origen and Plato. Well, Plato is way above that than Origen, although Origen is considered a important person in early church history. But anyway, what I'm trying to say simply is I wanted to point out who Ambrose was, okay? For those who don't know who he is. He is the bishop in Milan, in Italy, and is credited to basically bringing Augustine to the faith. Okay. In view of the fact that Christianity has always claimed it was the horrors of northern barbarians descending upon Greece and Rome that put out the light of learning and superinduced the Dark Ages, it is at least one item of interest to know that it was a Christian mob which burned the Alexandria library. Okay. Priceless beyond calculations, while the Goths, though destroying the temple of Diana at Ephesus, spared the library at Athens, also as cited by Higgins in the let's see, what is it called here? Anacalpus 565. St. Gregory is said by John of Salzburg to have burned the imperial library of the Apollo, from Forsyth's Travels, page 134, quote. It is indeed a fact looming large in reference to in Christian history that, as Guggenberg says in page 201, the influence of the Eastern or original philosophical Christianity from the Christianity of the West since the beginning, quote, since the beginning of the Middle Ages had been very slight, end quote. This is evidently the result of the substitute of faith for the knowledge that philosophy supplies. Guggenberg gives us an item of data here that speaks more significant on this point. He says that out of the 500 years from the death of Constantine to the end of the dispute regarding the images, he's talking about the big issue with the Eastern and eventually would not take what we call icons in the churches, which eventually led to the break of Eastern Orthodox Church. From 337 to 843, 248 of them, or nearly half of that period, were spent in open and avowed schism between the Eastern churches and the Rome. So this is, again, this is where eventually this will lead to the splits later on. Eventually, the languages that I see was the major one, because one spoke Greek and the other one spoke Latin. You can't continue to, you've got one part speaking Greek over here, you got on this side Latin. And if you're not studying either language, eventually you're not going to be able to communicate. But yes, this is important also. Let's see. We find that Giggenberg testifies authentically to the broad claims here made that philosophy was discredited and pushed out, displaced by ignorant faith. Just think about our own modern days today, folks. We don't study philosophy anymore. We don't study logic. None of this is taught, and not even the school level. That's been gone for even farther longer. But it's not even hardly pursued even in colleges anymore. See, the reason why people go to college simply is to get a better job. That's a fallacy, folks. You're supposed to better yourself. That's what college is about. That's what a university education was supposed to be about. It was supposed to educate yourself, to be able to do the finer things, not to have a job. Sorry if you feel that way, but it's the truth. We got people out here have these nice jobs, got good jobs, such and such. But the problem is, they do, and this is the issue I see, is that they're interested in money. They're not interested in basically learning. You see, this is the whole issue. They're not interested in learning anything. They're just simply interested in making money. Anyway, I've got off the tangent here again. Forgive me. So anyway, was discredited and pushed out, displeased by ignorant faith. Speaking of conditions in the 5th century, he says that the intelligence, quotum, of both priests and laity had fallen to so low a point that an uncouth compromise could be made between church dogmas and Teutonian superstitions, end quote. Since neither dogma nor Norse mythology was understood in its true occult sense, it was possible to join them in a common handling without taught obvious descriptions. F.S.C. Northrop, in his recent fine work, The Meaning of East and West, it's a book, I assume, calls the modern practice in Protestantism of repeating set phrases without knowing their real meaning. He called it, quote, idolatry and hocus pocus, end quote. That's where this whole thing came from, hocus pocus. All this stuff they were saying, and it's like, no one knows what he's talking about. Even the priests didn't know what they were talking about when they said these things. They just read it. Here again is a common unintelligent drowning out all capable intelligent perception, and thereby reducing religion to simple faith, which, however, always still cling tenaciously to the traditional customs of the past. What Guggenberg calls Teutonic superstitions, however, are to be truly recognized as ancient Norse mythological forms and usages, esoteric understood doubtless by the inner circle of the higher planes, but long ago gone meaningless among the common people. What, quote, simple faith, end quote, did in Christianity as early as the 6th century is again ably portrayed by Guggenberg. It brought the religion down exactly to the level of those pagan practices from which its horror the early fathers had labored to rescue the people, he writes in page 216. Quote, by a strange turn of fortune, Christianity now tends to become actually nothing more than a collection of legends and sacraments, and consequently to resemble that ancient Olympian paganism whose poverty of dogma and morals, lack of deep capacity in childish ceremonies, it had formerly inveighed against so bitterly. This was the foundation and not the complete patristic Christian tradition upon which the popular religion practice in the Middle Ages was reared. In the 16th century, the Reformation will try to uproot it and will only partially succeed, end quote. So you see what he's talking about here simply is that, now they saw this simply as that this paganism, see, but they again didn't understand, Some of this stuff was myths. You see, even they were already fooled. The gist of this really momentous passage to that whenever a religious movement surrenders itself to the influence of common standards of the masses, it sinks at once to the level in which an unintelligent herd tendency to follow custom in complete blindness and automation rules all practice. But again, correction of the historical imperfect opinions must be introduced for the sake of truth. Olympic paganism was not in poverty of either dogmas or morals, did not lack deep capacity, was not lost in childish ceremonialism, as he asserts. You see, he was wrong about that. That's what I'm trying to say. When we at last rise to the height of ability to comprehend the subtleties of the ancient legendary mythology, we shall know that these apparent parallelias of the great Greek race were the outward vestiges of profound verities. In support of this assertion, we have the declaration of no less a scholar than Sir Gilbert Murray that he begins to feel that the great works of the ancient Greeks' imagination are penetrated habitually by religious conceptions and postulates which literary savants like himself have not observed or understood. And this more discerning scholarship, he adds, while harder, rarer, and less popular, is perhaps the most permanently valuable work, and certainly needs to be defended at the junction of history. The effect to view just this is the basic warrant and apology for this volume. Murray gives further powerful support to the claims here adduced, when he says that the whole noble effect of the Greeks to enlighten the barbarian nations after Alexandrian conquest failed, this must be noted as one more failure of culture when esoteric wisdom attempted to reach and uplift the servile masses. The great Platonic philosophy failed. The Pythagoreans failed. The mystics failed. The Orphic and Hermetic philosophers failed. The great Neoplatonian effort failed. Alexandria ecclesiasticism and secularism failed. Mithraism, Manichaeism, Gnosticism, Therapeuticism, Essentialism, all failed. Failed, that is, to reach beyond the ranks of the limited aristocrats and to precipitate lasting beneficial effects upon the Stoic masses. Philosophy, of course, never fails. It is human appreciation and perceptive capacity that fails philosophy. And in the same way, and to the same extent, Christianity failed, even when it was given some chance of success by its incorporation of the Hellenistic systems of wisdom teaching through the epistles of Paul and the Johannine writings. It failed as culture always must fail, when it casts its pearls indiscriminately to the untamed appetites of the beasts. That's what Scripture says. You don't throw out pearls to, Did you see? You see the wisdom there? No, they see it as a plaything. They don't see, they don't understand. They don't have a mind, you see. They're not there. Christianity was never supposed to be, let's just say this, not Christianity. Anything is not going to be, in this society we even live today, I think is even far worse than it was even back then to me. Although the Western world got itself out of the mire, we call during the Renaissance. You see, went right back to the Greeks and started reading that and making art and stuff like that. But that was 600 years ago, folks. It's basically 1400s, 1500s. It failed as culture always must fail when it casts its pearls indiscriminately to the untamed appetites of beasts. Okay, that's what I said. What is most notable in all this is that Christianity is the ebullium and ferment that caused like froth to the surface, which deepened knowledge had vantage. We see one other disastrous outcome of the preachment of simple but uncritical and unintelligent faith to the common people, in a result pictured by Guggenberg, that is in page 221. Quote, they are drawn to the conviction that the Lamb itself is the occupant of the altar during the Mass, and that the consumption of the bread and wine constitutes a genuine sacrifice. Christ is sacrificed anew at every Mass as he was upon the Mount of Calvary, end quote. This throws on the historical screen the devastating mental effects of the attempt to impress simple folks with a realistic sense of what should clearly be told is drama and nothing more. But the citation is worth its space, if only because it prompts the observation amends its last sentence that in every reenactment of the Mass really crucifies a living being, the Christ, as an existing conscious entity, all over again. One surely is warranted in asking the Christians why, in the name of mercy and humanity, they do not put an end to this melancholy act of sadistic gruesomeness. Sadists, I should say, gruesomeness. Christians surely claim that Jesus is still a living personality and hears prayers and suffers crucifixion. The Mass crucifies him again every time. What kind of religion is it? Is it that knowingly goes on perpetually murdering its Redeemer over and over again? Might not psychology find that there is some true basis for the surmise that this repeated killing of the Christ has so blunted Christian hearts that they found it easy and emotionally stimulating to kill their dissenting fellowmen by the thousands of a later time? Good question. I believe that makes some sense there. But where could there be found a more direct and powerful condemnation of simple faith? Hold on a second. Let's go back. Whoa. Let's just say something here. Okay. So, yes, this is the whole thinking. This thinking still is here. Okay, let me explain what I'm saying. Part of that's the whole idea that the people of Israel are God's people. That's been taught here for the last 150 years here in the West. So there, the whole idea here is that people think that the people of Israel are the people of God. That God is that's His people. They get in a certain way. They have a different way than regular people. You see, that's already been created. This is part of the. I've done some things on this earlier. If you want to look at this, uh, C.I. Scofield is one of those critical ones that does that. Okay, so Cyrus Scofield is the major one in that particular, and he was he wrote well, I don't think he wrote the Bible. I mean, he made a version of the Bible the way he wanted it. He basically put notes to the side. He came in and said, "This is what it means." That's a pretty damning type of thing to do, isn't it? To tell people that. So you have the attitude simply is that people are waiting for the second coming of Christ, of Jesus. They've been waiting for a long time, you see, and they want God to destroy this whole planet. That's their attitude. They want to destroy everything. They want God to come here, and this is because this is their seed. The seeds have been planted in their hearts this way. They believe they're the Holy One. They believe that what they're doing, they're the holy people of God. When in reality, they're not. They're not even clear. They're not even close to that. But this is their idea. Their idea simply is they want God to destroy this whole planet. That's their attitude. That should scare the hell out of you people, because that's what they think. Now, that's not all the Christians, but that is a sizable group of people, fanatics, so to speak. And the reason why simply is they read the scriptures in the Old Testament when God dealt with certain things and they take it literally. They read the scriptures literally and they see that God goes in with his people of Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, but Jericho. They march around the city 7 times with the trumpets and such, and the whole city destroyed. The whole thing to do with other areas, to deal with the stories of Daniel. All those stories are supposed to be esoteric perspective, but no one bothered to tell them that, and they're looking at it literally. You see. Let's continue on. But where could there be found a more direct and powerful condemnation of simple faith as against knowledge than in this statement from Erigena, Division Naturale, a work developing against the Neoplatonic system? There, the outright assertion is made that Christian faith is an obstacle to the progress of knowledge, end quote. If medieval European history does not fully prove the correctness of this declaration of the Platonic Christian reformer, proof would indeed be hard to find. But it is difficult to perceive the almost stunning paradoxical truth of this remark by Eriginta unless one has had the background of Neoplatonic wisdom with its splendid illumination of the soul to silhouette vividly against its light the feeble constellation of sheer pious faith. Gingenberg comments on the deadening force of their pronounced dogmas of the ecclesiastic, which the blind and subservient faith of the laity enable authority to impose on the church, without knowledge of the divine or to understand the elevated import in the doctrines or ordinance, worship degenerated to a meaningless automationism of habit. Yeah, yeah. People would go up, do certain things, and they're just like little soldiers, little armies, little robots. They just walk, do certain things, take this, and don't say something in Latin. Don't even know what they're talking, know what they're doing. Yeah, religion went into a dead formalism. To act without meaning is close to the last stage of human irrationality and inanity. And with intelligence completely reduced to a nullity under the power of faith, there was neither chance nor room for the free spirit which had been the dynamo of driving power at the inception of the movement to exert its active and purifying influences. In fact, once a code of dogmas had become crystallized and the organization had been defiled by authority, the activations of a free spirit became a menace to settled orthodoxy. And when spurs and saddles of such free inquiry were made in the century, they were forthwith and summarily beaten to earth. All too diaphanous is the unsoundness of a religion which can so reduce the normal sense and balance of human beings, not all of them whom can always be rated as dollish simpletons, as to drag them to the sorry past of forgetting their divine dignity and accepting their categorization as worms in the sight of deity. And that's been used also too. Calvin used this. John Calvin used it simply said, man is nothing but a worm in God's eye. No, that's not true neither. So again, you can see how even the Reformation was off, which I knew that. But I'm just saying simply this illustration, he would actually say that these people were as worms. And his students didn't like him neither. I don't know if you knew that. John Calvin was, there were things that were drew on papers and such of him. People didn't like him as even though they were students. They saw him enormously, I don't know if they saw him as sick or whatever, but he was a major pivotal part of Geneva long ago and was put into power by the city council. Some egregious stultification of the sense of normal human worth must be superinduced upon average minds before so unworthy a self-humiliation can be inflicted. A system of faith that ends by abasing the natural human being to the level of the worm has little on which to ground its claim to being the highest religion in the world. And this is the religion that has most loudly asserted its claim that it more than any other has assaulted the dignity, the divine worth of the individual. Again, let truth have its hearing on another aspect of this theme. Here's the church who arrogantly boasts that it tore religion out of the hands of the few cold-hearted aristocrats of intellect and gave it to the mean and lowly to their infinite benefit. Yet Gingenberg paints a picture of the revulsion of the common people against the same church in the latter period in Europe. He is speaking of the groups that again voiced their disapproval of the dead dogmatism of the church and asked for the privilege of giving free vent to the striving affections of the spirit in the individual life, unrestricted by ecclesial dogmas, page 290. Down below the agitation of these people, hostility to the established church was so evident, or evidently strong, Not only did these groups no longer believe that she was fulfilling her divine mission, but they saw in her the main obstacle to the advent of that era of happiness to which they looked forward. End quote. Even those who gave religion to the poor and simple will find that these beneficiaries will not forever receive with complete docility a gift that leaves them hungry and unnourished. Even the worm will turn. And eventually, the divine principle in all mortals, no matter how overlaid and stifled by ignorance, will not everlasting accept without rebellion the characterization of infinite meanness. Now and again, among the common people is born a uncommon spirit, a soul that rises despite obstacles to understanding and a vision, and who may open their eyes of his lowly fellows to the poison of their imposed diet. The poor can at times even bite and mangle the hands that holds forth the spiritual diet of worms, end quote. In 1260, there arose in Germany, Holland, and Hungary, and in Flanders, which is modern day Belgium, all eastern France, following the first uprising in Italy, in order calling themselves uh, Flanagans or penitents. They marched in bands through the towns and villages of their countries, chanting hymns and lashing each other for the space of 33 and a half days, as they regarded this as the period of time necessary to effect the purification of their souls. On their way, says Giggenberg, they massacred Jews and displayed their feelings towards the clergy by robbing the churches of the possession and abusing the possessors. Quote, while fanatics like Tauchen, Tauch, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm just going to spell it for you, Tauchelm in the Netherlands, or Eon de Noodier, who gave himself out to be the Son of God, are by no means rare, end quote. See how this goes? See how this gets out of hand? See? The free human spirit finds or takes many strange ways of manifesting its independence when it is too long and too rigidly held in conformity to express forms and formulas. Tyrants have often learned this lesson when it was too late. The Christian church, which arose as an outburst of the free but unintelligent expression of the feelings of lowly people, eventually became the crystallization of such a rigorous despotism in the kingdom of thought that its own devotees could no longer brook in silent submission in ecclesiastic thraldom, and so it was rent violently asunder in the 16th century. Good simple folk lacked the capability of discerning recondite aspects of truth and the abstracts of philosophical understanding, but they are not to the same degree incapable of sensing gross falsities, which the course of events has a way of bringing to open sight after a time. Time often teaches what brain alone cannot discern. The people can at times be wisely led to take up arms against humbug and dishonesty. Still to be examined on the theme of faith versus knowledge is the patent truth that life and evolution exorbitantly demand of the individual as sine qua non for his advancement to the goal of glory, something more than sheer faith, as Paul showed, that something is first goodness or virtue, and then the prime requisite is knowledge. Nature would be unjust if she dispensed without discrimination her blessing equally to those who have who have through toil and suffering met her terms of capability, and to those who have not so earned them, the immutable truth in that man will not receive any grade or quality of beneficence until it has evolved the ability to command it. In this sense, life bestows nothing gratuitously. All her benefits are freely all her benefits are freely held forth to all, but only he who knows how can take them. This is the fundamental meaning of the word king. Seen in his German etymology, he is the one who can, C-A-N, quote. Part of Nietzsche's abhorrence to Christianity was engendered by his observation of the workings of one of the basic theological dogmas of the religion, its emphasis on a practically unlimited largeness of blessings from God on no more substantial ground of merit than simple belief, end quote. Such as unmeasured generosity of deity introduced chaos into the philosophical ordered world, where precise laws rule. Effects must stand in exact relation to adequate causes, and the Christian doctrines of the forgiveness of sins, the vicarious atonement, and the inexhaustible reservoirs of God's infinite mercy and grace. Dismantle the philosophical conceptions of cosmos. If the philosopher finds it in his own life that salvation from life's ills is only won by ding of his king's search and capture of truth and his obedience to natural law, he is loath to accredit a system which claims that a few hours of Maudlin emotionalism will win eternally bliss. A permanent reflection of Millman in most appropriate here, page 29. Quote, when man becomes more acquainted with his own nature, the less he is satisfied with deities east in his own mold. With deities cast in his own mold. End quote. This is indeed is a trenchant deduction, and we need look little further for a elucidation of the whole anthropomorphia theory upon the masses. Educated men become more realistically aware of the subtleties and shallowness of their own motivations as well as of their sincerities. But the lower masses remain naive and unsuspecting, credulous and susceptible. The deeper thinker will accept no God in his own image, however magnified to cosmic structure. The thinker has won his way to freedom from ready credulity. The uncritical man has not, but must accept what reverent authority hands out to him. Millman's plunged without hesitation into the tremendous question under discussion in the passage on page 32 of his Great History of Christianity is a noble statement and comments our attention, since it badly needs competent answer. Quote, philosophy as a substitute for religion was still more manifestly deficient, for in this first place it was unable or condescended not to reach the body of the people, whom the progress of civilization was slowly bringing up towards the common level, and where it found or sought proselytizes, it spoke without authority, and distracted with the multitude of the conflicting sects the patient but bewildered inquirer. Philosophy maintained the aristocratic tone, which, while it declared to a few elect spirits alone, it was possible to communicate the highest secrets of knowledge, more particularly the mysteries of the great supreme being, proclaimed in vain and unwise to attempt to elevate the many to such exalted speculation. Here is the old cry. Philosophy failed the masses. It ministered only to the needs of the aristocrat few. But it is time the weak points of this strictly on philosophy be examined. To call philosophy a substitute for religion is, to begin with, a false premise, of course. Philosophy can be called a substitute for religion only in the wholly admissible sense in which it can be said that maturity is a substitute for childish immaturity, or a good meal in a substitute for an empty stomach, or education a substitute for ignorance. Millman's use of the term substitute, end quote, is in the sense that religion is adequate and perfect element, while philosophy, as an alternate, is an implicitly inferior replacement. In the proper sense, philosophy substitutes vaster understanding for religion, groping, faith, and the sooner the substitution in the sense is made, the better. As Miss Langer has said, philosophy is that upper realm of vision and knowledge in which the activations of religions are absorbed and finally dissipated, like smoke and steam in the pure upper air. It is not deficiency or defect or abstruse speculation and reflective thinking that they are not readily communicable to the mass level mind. It is their nature, yes, even their utility and their beneficiaries, that they cannot be. It is time that just rebuke be administered the criticisms thrown eternally at esotericism and intellectual aristocrats for their deficiencies in not being something which by their nature and description they have no right to be asked to be. A syllogism might more pointedly bring out the illogicality of the argument which is used to prove the deficiency of philosophy. The first or major premise would be esoteric philosophy is abstract abstruse and highly recondile. The second or minor premise would be B, the masses are incapable of grasping abstruse and recondile philosophy. The conclusion would be C, therefore esoteric philosophy is defective. This is unsound, upshot of all this diatribe of Christian writers against ancient esotericism. It makes the stupidity of the ignorance the criteria of the good of esotericism. The masses are dumb and recusant to every higher advance of enlightenment until higher genius discovers and demonstrates it. One does not call higher mathematics defective for being beyond the reach of the common mind. It is time we stop belaboring esotericism for not being something other than what it is by nature it is. Then when the question arises as to supplying the needs to the lower ranks of society, let wisdom guide the discussion to proper channels. Failing that guidance, history has taken hold of the situation and fed the vulgar multitudes of religion, with philosophy only vaguely hovering in the background in the guise of a little-known theology. The tragedy of this actual working out of the problem is, as has been stated, that the multitude has never been fed on truth simplified, to be grasped by that level of capacity, but truth turned into ultra falsity through the image of truth for its actual substance. When spiritual complexities have been dramatized in fable, allegory, and myth in order to stimulate the imagination through concrete visualization, the sad outcome has been that in the incredible density of their minds, the people fail to see the principle defeated and take the dramatization for the truth itself. Of course, philosophy condescends not to reach the body of the people, for the people have invariably treated it as did the dogs and swine of the biblical metaphor. They snap at it and turn and rend it, trampling it in their filth. Christian insistence that philosophy failed because it did not transfigure their common masses of people is the most damning indictment of its own defective insight into the authentic and realistic conditions that are basic for the high human culture. And what is more, when the actuality of history is studied without bias and the conspicuous consequences of the Christian effort to cast arcane philosophy to the hoi polloi over 20 centuries are fully tabulated, it is seen that they allegedly noble attempts to take the mysteries of truth to the masses has eventuated in the unparalleled darkening of the human mind, the loss of all true sense arcane books of wisdom, the hallucinations of the millions, the duplicity of all eschatology, rulership, and the befoulment of history with the most frightful inhumanity of man to man in world annuals. In the same strain runs the exceptional frank tribute to the high quality of the esoteric philosophy taught at Alexandria and its later degenerations. Kuhn says that it has become less philosophical, more and more spiritualistic and fanatical, until it was finally overwhelmed by the Mohammedans swept into the 7th century. Quote, paganism and the old Greek culture had flared up in one final magnificent expression in the teaching of Polonius and his Neoplatonic companions. End quote. Then referring to Polonius, he writes such and such at 105 to 107. Quote, his philosophy was intended for the intellectual highbrows only. Like most of the Hellenists, he appeared to have despised Christianity, looked upon it as a vulgar superstition fit only for slaves and the lower classes of workmen. Naturally enough, the philosophy of Polonius appealed to the higher classes, especially at the Roman court, and during the later part of the 3rd century, it looms up as a most formidable rival of the Christian teachings. Quote, it possessed attractive features for the upper class intellectuals, but it had no word for the downtrodden masses of the empire and therefore failed in its competition, end quote. Then follow statements that are too singular to be missed. Quote, the Neoplatonics allied itself with the old pagan cults in a last effort to prevent the inevitable, but the new faith had the power to deal with facts as they are, while the other cults lived only in a world of dreams. The gray area of the Middle Ages was at hand, end quote. Kuhn is here graphically depicting the most tragic turn of events in world history and treats it in a turn inward delight. that the magnificent enlightenment glowing on every page of the great Neoplatonic system was doomed to inevitable extinction under the thickening pall of mental incapability expressing itself in the new Christian movement should be turned by a man posing as a scholar exponent of the religion as a, quote, world of dreams, and set over in disparaging contrast to, quote, the things as they are, end quote, revealing pitiably the incompetentism of the Christian mind about true history. Had the philosophy of Plotinus conquered instead of Christianity, there would not have been a hand that is the quote the gray Middle Ages, end quote. One of the dreams out of his philosophy Polonius gave to Christianity itself, the dream of the Trinity. We are indebted to Lecky for a view of some of at least the facts as they are, quote, which has pleased Christian ministers to deal out to the gullible fathers, says he in volume 2 of the History of European Morals, page 223. Quote, it was the custom then as it is the custom now for Catholic priests to strain their imaginations of young children by ghastly pictures of future misery, to imprint upon the virgin mind atrocity images which they hoped not unreasonably might prove indelible, end quote. He speaks of the incredibly grotesque horror visions reportedly seen by Christian monks of the pagans suffering torture in hell with literal fire and all the lurid realism. They fed to children the stories of demons punishing the wicked and pictured the impending destruction of the world. Sounds like today, doesn't it? Sure does. Mr. Hallam, that is Hallam, The Middle Ages, Chapter 9, Part 1, speaking of the legends of the miracle saints, says, quote, it must not be supposed that these absurdities were produced as well as nourished by ignorance. In most cases, they were the work of deliberate imposture. Every cathedral or monastery had its tutor saint, and every saint his legend, fabricated in order to enrich the churches under his protection. By exaggerating his virtues, his miracles, and consequently his power of serving those who paid liberally for his patrons, no impartial person can doubt his essential truth. End quote. And next quote here is the religious history of several centuries is little more than a history of the rapacity of priests and of the credulity of laymen. End quote. Another quote here simply, but legends of this kind must not blind us to the fact that the period of Catholic ascension was on the whole one of the most deplorable in the history of human mind. A crowd of superstitions attributed to infallible wisdom barred a path of knowledge, and the charge of magic or the charge of heresy crushed every bold inquirer in the sphere of physical nature or of opinions. True inquiry had been cursed by the church. In other words, they didn't want anybody to ask any questions, folks, here. They didn't want anything of that nature. They wanted to keep people dumbed down. A blind, unquestionable credulity was inculcated at the first of duties, and the habit of doubt, the impartiality of a suspense judgment, the desire to hear both sides of a disputed question, and to emancipate the judgment from unreasoning prejudice were all and consequently condemned. The belief in the guilt of error and doubt became universal, and that belief may be confidently pronounced to be the most perilous superstition that has ever been accredited among mankind. Not till the education of Europe passed from the monasteries to the universities, not till Mohammedanism, science, and classical free thought and industrial independence broke the scepter of the church did the intelligent revival of Europe begin. Quote, the monasteries diffuse whenever their influence extended habits of credulity and tolerance that are the most deadly poisons to the human mind, end quote. It is difficult to look upon Catholicism in any other light than as the most deadly enemy of the scientific spirit, end quote. This incredible recital could go on for hundreds of pages. It is thrown in here only to present actuality what the Christian power to deal with facts as they are brought forth. Yeah, I'm going to take a break right now. So I'm going to take a stop here. Let's see what we got here. Let's see what we got, because it's yeah, this video is about an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop here at this point. Um, again, thank you for being here. I will conclude the rest of it probably in a couple hours from now. I'm going to take a break here and get some lunch. And thank you for listening, and wish you a good day. And we'll talk to you soon. Okay.